Welcome to the video. We're going to talk about good and bad PowerPoint design, which is an important aspect for being able to create PowerPoints and presentations that catch and hold readers' and viewers' attention. So first of all, you want to use a design. Although some people feel like these designs are overused, having a design, a background theme, is better than having a blank white screen. If you want to create your own, you can do that using the master slides, but generally most people either use a pre-set up design from Microsoft, or if their company has a template, they'll use the company template. So it's just up here at the top ribbon where it says design, and they have a bunch to choose from, and then you can also browse for more themes online. And it's just important to pick something that isn't too wild and attention grabbing, like it'll steal attention from your actual content, and to make sure it's something that's topic appropriate. So for example, if you're in a business setting giving a presentation for your company and your company has nothing to do with school or children, it really wouldn't be appropriate to choose a very popular one that looks like a child's handwriting on a chalkboard. That'd be more appropriate for presentation with children as the main audience, or about children, or for a school type setting. You'll want to make sure to use slide titles for every slide, so you should consistently place them wherever they're located in the template. Usually that's at the top. Sometimes it can be on the side, but you'll want a short descriptive title that really captures the viewer's attention, and they can quickly and easily read it and understand what the entire slide is going to be about. And for your entire presentation, the slide titles need to be the same. So for example, if you're doing this presentation style theme, then it would be 46 point for all of the slide titles, and they could only be so many characters long before it would start trying to reduce the size. You'll also want to keep the overall PowerPoint and presentation short. So for the PowerPoint itself, you can follow the 8x8 rule, which means that you should have 8 lines of text or fewer per slide and 8 words per row or fewer. And that means ultimately you'd end up with 64 words per slide. So it's very short, very quick. And it's sometimes confusing that people think, I'm going to write everything up here and have my audience read it. Well, audiences really don't want to read your content. They just want an outline, something to follow along as you are presenting to them. And make sure that each slide only has one main point or focus, which is just like a paragraph, having paragraph unity in an essay or a document. So essentially, one paragraph in a document would translate to roughly one slide in a PowerPoint. And you should plan to spend about 30 seconds to 2 minutes per slide while presenting. So if it takes you more than 2 minutes to go over the slide, you probably have too much information. And generally speaking, you should be using a bullet point list on each slide to present your information. This helps you avoid writing in paragraphs, which are too dense, too much content for a PowerPoint. And it keeps things organized, keeps things easy to read, whereas, again, paragraphs, not easy to read, not easy to jump into. And if you need to expand on key details or provide examples, that's when you would want to break it down and include sub-bullet points under your main bullet points. And you want to make sure that you have large, clear font for your readers. It is particularly important if you are presenting in a room versus sharing a presentation file where people can zoom in on their own and make things larger or smaller. But you need to be aware that this is for an audience, and can they read the words that you're putting up there? So all of the text should be easy to read, so you want to use a print font, something fairly common, Calibri, however you pronounce it, Times New Roman, Helvetica, those are all very safe fonts to choose. If you do choose a design, usually there is a preset font, and usually it's a pretty good option. You want to avoid scripts or scrolling fonts, and you also want to avoid overly graphic fonts that are hard to read. And then make sure you use a large font for everything, 36 point or larger for slide titles, and 20 point or larger for body text. And even if you have very few words on the screen, like this slide, for example, has very few words, notice that it's taking up a good amount of space. It's almost taking up the full body of the slide there. So that is good that it is big enough to read, spaced out a bit, and not just, size 12, tiny in the upper left-hand corner of the slide. So you've got a lot of space. Make sure that you use it. Visuals are also highly appreciated for PowerPoints. That's kind of one of the benefits, is you can show visuals, including videos. You can put videos in or interrupt your PowerPoint and show a video as well. And, images are worth 1,000 words. So wherever they're helpful and they help you get the message across quicker, or as an example, you want to include those. Don't include graphics, visuals, videos if they're just going to distract or take up space. So we have some examples here. We've got the table, a graph, a picture, Smart Art, which is a built-in function for PowerPoint, Word, all of the Microsoft products basically. Doing a screenshot, that's particularly helpful if you're giving instructions on how to do something. And then very recently, Microsoft included icons in Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, and you can pick from a huge library of icons and change them to just about any color. So it's very easily making your presentation more visually interesting. And then just to give an example of spacing here, I have a screenshot of the previous slide and pointing out some things. So the idea of white space or negative space is that you have things spaced out enough that it doesn't seem crowded or inconsistent or confusing. So what you can see here is in between the lines, there's the preset default for the bullet point list, which is usually on the generous side for PowerPoints, a good amount of white space here between each bullet point. And you can see when you have short bullet points, you get even more white space. So this nice break between different parts of your slide. And then you want to leave the right-hand margin of the slide, the text alone. You don't want to take that all the way to the edge of the slide. You do want to maintain the standard space around the edges so that nothing falls off the screen or is unviewable. And then you can see here between the graphics and the text, I have a certain amount of space, and between the graphics themselves, a certain amount of space, so they feel spaced out. They don't feel crowded. Notice that I have 6 images, so I have 3 on the first row, 3 on the second row. They're all lined up as best as I'm able to line them up, so that it seems like I've made careful layout choices. And make sure that you're consistent with your choices. So from slide to slide, your choices should be the same. You can change them in between different PowerPoint presentations, but slide to slide within the same presentation, they should be the same. So if you're going to use periods at the end of your bullet point list entries, make sure all of them have periods. Or if you're choosing not to use periods, which is again okay to do with bullet point lists, none of your entries should end with a bullet point, or with a period. Make sure that you're using the same font from slide to slide. You shouldn't be changing it unnecessarily. Make sure you're using the same way to emphasize information. So if you're using bold or different colors or italics, to emphasize things, make sure it's consistent. If you decide to use full sentences for your bullet point list, make sure they're all full sentences. Or what more people find easy is the fragments. So just using sentence fragments where you don't end the sentence with a period for each of those. And then make sure you have consistent formatting for your visuals. So if you have pictures, graphs, that kind of stuff, that if you're putting frames around them, they're the same color and size of frame, sizing is consistent, placement is fairly consistent. And then you can jazz things up. You don't have to necessarily jazz things up. This has been a fairly plain PowerPoint presentation. There's a couple of the slides were a little more jazzy than others, but you do have this option for design ideas. So if you look at the top row, the top ribbon here, and you're on design, you'll see that there's design ideas as a little icon here. And this generates ideas for you based on the content that you've put into the slide. So it's a cool way of having a very quick suggestion for the content that you've put in there. However, it doesn't always get it right, so you want to be careful with your choice. Make sure that the formatting makes sense. Make any changes necessary. And then finally, include all necessary end slides. So you might need some of these or all of these, depending on what you're doing. So if you are actually presenting to an audience and are willing to take questions, you should end with a question slide where you basically say questions and you are showing that you're welcoming questions. If you are not presenting live or you have no way for them to ask questions, don't include a slide like that. If you are using sources within your presentation, you should cite your sources, create a reference slide or a works cited slide to say, here are the sources, here's the publication information. You can go find those sources if you want. And then if you have additional information that isn't directly included in your presentation, but you're like, hey, this would help my audience, understand what's happening, you can at the very end do additional resources slide or appendix slides so that you can share some additional information, but you don't plan to cover it. So like if somebody has a question, you can go to an appendix slide and say, oh, I have that information here, let's look at it. Or if you're sending a file around, you can say, here's appendix material. It's not necessary for you to read it. However, it has some good information. That's what you're saying when you have something in an appendix. People can read it at their own will and not feel like they're missing out on something if they don't read it. All right, so those are some of the rules on how to create a good PowerPoint design and to give readers what they are looking for, what they've become accustomed to, and to avoid some bad habits and bad choices that sometimes get made for PowerPoints.